Hello again and Happy New Year everybody! Well, in today's video we're gonna try something different. I got many questions about the way I approach photography, the way I edit, the way I compose, and the way I read the light. So I thought I might be able to answer a few of these questions by doing a POV style video. Before we get into it, a quick note about gear. I am using the X100VI, which is also the only camera I brought for this trip. And now I would say, let's get into the photo walk. I started my walk in the outskirts of the city of Luxembourg, and on my way to the bus I figured that there was this grass lawn and there was nice droplets of water on the grass that were illuminated by the sun. So I figured that if I go close enough with my camera, I could actually use that foreground to create some nice bokeh blobs and wait for a subject to pass through my scene. I also enabled the ND filter of my X100VI because it allows me to cut off or block off a part of the light in the scene, preventing me from having to use the electronic shutter. And this is the photo I came up with that presented a really good start into the photo walk.
Gare Rocade.
As I arrived at the central station, I quickly found this spot where I could use the railing as a nice leading line into the scene. There was the sun just passing through and I was waiting for somebody to come out of this elevator, and that also eventually happened, leaving me with this photo here that I was also very happy with. Then I left the central station and I came across this tram stop where I had the rails of the tram that I could use as a leading line into my scene. So I went nice and close and I waited for a subject to pass through my scene, and that also eventually happened. Next I passed through the Gare Quartier, or the district of the central station, and I went to the judiciary city of Luxembourg, and there I came across this local park where these two gentlemen were sitting very unconventionally on a bench, framed nicely by trees to their left and to their right, and their shadows were creating really nice leading lines. So I stood there for a bit, saw what they were doing and experimented a little bit, and these two were my favorite shots. Then I came across this iconic view on St. Michael's Church in Luxembourg, and it's a very classic photo, but I still had to document it, so I decided to go for it. And you can really use St. Michael's Church as like your focal point in your photo. Then still at the Judiciary City, there was light that was just passing through the buildings, and you could really use these patches to create some interesting composition. So I was waiting for people to pass through, and eventually there was the security guy just passing through, creating this lovely rim light, him being silhouetted, nice contrast, bright background, and well, the person in the shot, so that turned out really nicely. Here another patch of light that I found really interesting, and I hoped that there was somebody coming from the light source through the patch of light toward me. That unfortunately did not happen, so well, I had to be happy with the photo I got, but it also turned out relatively nicely. Then with the same patch of light, I also tried to sidelight a subject walking through it while their shadow should be displayed on the white wall that you can see on the right hand side. And eventually I got this photo that I'm also fairly happy with. And then I came across this scene which turned out to be one of my favorites, because you had the sun just passing through this portal at the right moment in time and creating this really lovely leading line toward the light source. Well, I was just waiting for a subject to pass through and create a lovely silhouette with a nice rim light and this strong contrast between the subject and the bright background. This was my first try, but I wanted to incorporate the entire shadow of a person into my photo. So I was waiting for somebody to go through the portal, but being far enough away to actually encompass their entire shadow into the composition, if that makes sense. And this is the photo I came up with, and I really liked it. Then I came across this little path. I don't even know what the street is called. I just call it Lantern Alley. This is not the real name. But especially at night, these lanterns are essentially the only source of light you can find in that street. So I'm going to show you a photo I actually took just a few days later that should become one of my favorite photos of December, actually. There was this couple coming down the street, and there was a car coming from behind that was really illuminating their silhouettes, creating this really lovely scene, especially in combination with the fog and the lanterns. Then I came across this incredible view on the Grund and the Abbey of Neumünster, which is really just like one of the characteristic key parts you have to go through in town, and I just documented it a bit, taking a few photos. Then I came across this scene, which was essentially the only part of the fortress that was still illuminated by the setting sun, and I also tried to frame it up in an acceptable way. Then I went onto the viewpoint myself, and I tried to create a sun star with the last rays of sun in conjunction with the nice church tower and the river, the Alzette or Wilzucht as we call it, as additional elements in the scene. And if you try hard enough and you stop down far enough on the X100VI, like F11 or F16 for instance, you can actually create some really decent sun stars with that camera. And then I came across St. Michael's Church, that was at this point the only building that was still illuminated by the sun. And fun fact, there is actually a cannonball that got stuck during a wall at St. Michael's Church, and if you look very closely you can still see the cannonball stuck in the tower today, which is always a really interesting detail. I didn't capture it, however. Then I went to the other side of town, where I had the sun as well as the Gulle Frau, or Golden Lady as we call it, and I tried to frame up a shot that has both the Golden Lady, the sun, and an interesting subject in it. And in the end, there was this boy being carried on the shoulders of his dad that made for a really interesting subject. And at this point the light was really at its best, and I found this really interesting man standing there waiting to cross over the street, and he was wearing this very characteristic hat, and it actually became one of my favorite photos of the Photowalk. But my favorite photo was still to come. It was these three people just walking down that alley, and the sun just being at its lowest possible, very bright light source, and very strong backlighting, meaning that my subjects would be silhouetted, making for this very, very nice 16:9 composition that should become arguably my favorite photo of the walk. Then I still came across this very minimal scene after the sun had already set of one of our local 747-800 Cargo Lux planes, and as the sun had already set, the sky was still incredibly pretty, so I still tried to capture it a bit. And in my opinion, one of the biggest benefits of the X100VI over the X100V is really the introduction of IBIS, because it really makes these lovely light trails and you can actually expose handhold for longer, which in my opinion is such a massive upgrade. And since this was the first POV walk on this channel, I would be really grateful if you could leave your feedback down below in the comment section so that I can further improve this format in the future. And with that being said, I hope to see you next week in next week's video. Bye.